Joining me now is Sourabh Gupta with the Institute for China-America Studies. He's a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist. And we've seen him on this broadcast a lot, talking about China-India relations. In the past, though, it's about their tensions, the border dispute.
Yes.
Talk to me about how important this is to see these two leaders coming together and kind of having a nice informal dialogue.
The format also is so interesting that it's been happening so informally, and the meeting was set up in such a short period of time. I think it's very, very important. India and China have been able to lay a floor beneath their current cyclical round of difficulties. They did that towards the latter part of last year. But what they're really trying to do now is kind of tease out how they can go forward together. And this is a time when they do have differences of views, but they also understand that there's so many important aspects in their relationship which have ramifications bilaterally, regionally, and multilaterally, and trying to come on that same page.
Let's talk a little bit about those, but before we do, I think it's interesting, and maybe you can talk to us about this juxtaposition. I mean, we were just watching this remarkable gathering. You're seeing the inner relations between the Korean Peninsula, these two leaders coming together. First time a leader from the DPRK setting foot in the ROK. Remarkable, but at the same time, we've got this gathering coming together, probably not gaining as big a headlines, but when you look at it, this affects more than a third of the world's population. These are two giants sitting down and talking to each other. You talked about bilateral, regional. Tease it out for us. I mean, what are we looking at?
From a bilateral perspective, there are real difficulties in their relationship. They have different expectations of each other in their relationship. India has the sense that it is being held down in South Asia, and China feels that India, on the other hand, is trying to use the United States in some way to kind of contain it and not allow China to find its rightful place. Both countries can find their rightful place independently, and they are not in a position to contain each other. But there is some degree of anxiety in this regard. And these anxieties have been, I would say, embellished by the fact that India is moving more eastwards in terms of its Act East policy, and it's linking up with the Australias and Japans and the US in some sort of a maritime format. Meantime, China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, is going south and is now suddenly has very good relations with a lot of South Asian neighbors, and India feels its influence in its own neighborhood is being undercut. And this is something which will stay in flux, but there's something that both of them can reassure each other of their intentions. And from that perspective, from a bilateral perspective, this conversation is important. Regionally, of course, it's very important to think about it. By 2050, US, India, and China will be the three most important players in the international system. Mm-hmm. I mean, the EU will also be important, but they will be the biggest players. And at this point of time, when there's so much flux multilaterally and regionally, with a new American president and a very different sort of views that he brings to the table, India and China are hoping that they can be pillars of stability at a time of uncertainty and flux in the international system.
You know, it's interesting, the two of us sitting here across from one another, and then you enter Donald Trump in between. You brought up the U.S., but you also mentioned Belt and Road, and this almost is this other group over here, Pakistan. China and Pakistan working very well together with Belt and Road. Of course, India and Pakistan, not the greatest relations. How do you smooth over that?
It shouldn't be too hard to smooth over it, frankly. India's objections, let me back up a little. The problem here is India has stated objections on Belt and Road and unstated objections on Belt and Road. The stated objections can be dealt with. The stated objection is that part of Belt and Road goes through Pakistani Kashmir. It's a disputed territory. If development has to happen out there, that must be done solely by the Pakistanis. And China, by putting up infrastructure there, also is taking a side in a dispute. Fair enough, that's a fair argument. And perhaps the Pakistanis can take the lead in developing just Pakistani Kashmir while the rest of CPEC and the Belt and Road continues. So this stated objection can be dealt with. It's the unstated objection of India which is the issue, and I think it's primarily India's issue which it needs to deal with. The issue is that Belt and Road has been welcomed by everybody In the SCO, India, among all those countries, the foreign minister's declaration, India was the only one which did not put its name to it. In South Asia, everybody has endorsed Belt and Road. And the South Asians look at China not just as another hedge or something, they look at it as a means for prosperity, regional connectivity and prosperity. India has not been able to do that regional connectivity and share and grow prosperity in its neighborhood, which China has been doing and doing very successfully of late. And it is that unstated objection that our influence is being reduced through these means, which is causing some of the friction. But India has to be open about it. It needs to have a strategy for regional connectivity and enduring prosperity to the region and beyond, and talk about its anxieties to China, because China also has its own anxieties of what India exactly is doing with the United States. And it's only through communication that these anxieties can be allayed.
It all starts with talking, and they're doing that. That's a good sign, right? Thanks so much for coming in. Sourabh Gupta.